This is the Daily Practice podcast with Crystal Borrelli
and Andrea Helleman.
Hari Om, Hari Om, Hari Om.
I don't understand free will. I've listened to scientists talk about it. I've listened to it's one of the big philosophical questions.
Yeah.
Whether it's real, whether it's an illusion.
Well, it's all an illusion.
Yeah.
This
Okay.
whole
Well,
thing is an illusion.
Explain it to us then.
How can I explain this? This is how I perceive it. So you might be able to control my body, but you don't have my mind and you don't have my spirit. So you can be locked away for a long period of time, let's say, like in jail or imprisoned in some way. And physically you might be contained, but you can't take my inner spirit away from me that I have full control of. I mean, people can try and they can manipulate and all the things, but as I understand it, free will is that you have a choice to suffer, kind of like what Buddha said. To live is to suffer, but suffering is a choice.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I mean, that's a whole other conversation to unpack. But that's kind of how I see it. You don't always get to choose your experience of what happens to you, but you can choose your happiness within that experience. The power of choice to choose the darkness or the light. And that's kind of how I see it. No matter how much abuse or how much, there's always that spark of light. And that light, that spark of divinity, of being the sovereign being, of being this embodiment of God that can't be taken. Mm-hmm. Only you have that power within you. And people can try and they can definitely suppress the spirit and suppress you in many things. But ultimately you can prevail. And I think that's ingrained in us as a part of being embodied.
Mm-hmm. I think the first time I ever heard of that concept or even thought about it was Nelson Mandela, because I can't remember when he got released.
You hear about that, people being imprisoned and people giving prayer to their food and being like, you might have my body, but you can't break my spirit. And maybe it's so that we can survive, really survive those moments.
The focus of this podcast is shifting perspective. Mm-hmm. And I think part of the reason why we want to do a podcast together, everything that we've sort of been creating, was because of that first podcast that we did here a couple years ago, right before the pandemic. One thing that I definitely missed within that was having these conversations and talking about things and shifting my perspective.
Krishnamacharya, he's known as the grandfather of yoga. He says that yoga is the practice of shifting old negative patterns of thinking into new positive patterns of thinking, or something like that. So it's taking a situation and seeing it one way, but then perhaps switching it and seeing it in another way to shed a little bit more light or find a little bit more, not even just clarity, but something that feels a different way of seeing it. So you're basically lifting your awareness out of a little bubble. And perhaps by sometimes stepping out of the situation or out of it, you can see the bigger picture. And then you can see that, there might have been a purpose for that, which there usually always is a purpose for any type of hardship or shadow. That's the great teachings of everything. And then from there, there can be some peace or light or space or healing that can come from that.
I also think hindsight is 20/20. When you can be back here looking at the whole scene, then it does make a lot of sense. But it's how do you stay so grounded and connected in the present moment to actually see that in real time? I think that's one thing that I really struggle with.
Mm-hmm. There's this saying that everything is perfect as of now, and as of now, everything is perfect.
That's a nice one.
Yeah. So, and this goes back to the very first Yoga Sutra 1.1, Atta Yoga Nushasanam, which is now begins the practice of yoga, now begins the guidance of yoga. So every moment in this moment, and now there's a moment, every second there's a new moment. So it's in that moment, how do you view it? And can you see that right now, instead of worrying about the past, the body, this is cool, the body lives in the past, the mind lives in the future, and the breath is in the present moment. So by breathing long, deep breaths and that sigh and shifting, maybe it's like a lion's breath, maybe it's the breath of joy, kind of shifting the energy a little bit to be grounded, so that you can see that this moment of now, everything is okay, right? And everything, trusting, there's so much of trust in the universe, like that everything is going to work out. Like I stress about money quite a bit. And I've always been
Let's
fine.
talk about that.
No, let's not.
Well, I was going to ask you, what is your negative pattern that you're constantly at war with or at ends with?
Yeah, well, this goes back to like a karmic, why I'm here for, to heal. Mine is being seen, my light to be seen, my worth, self-worth, that I'm deserving. And that's like an old belief system from like 5 years old that I've kind of replay, and I'm getting better at it, recognizing when it's coming to the surface, and then being able to choose in that moment if I'm going to continue to run that program, or if I'm going to be like, thank you, that's an old way of being. I'm going to choose to be seen in this moment, and I'm slowly shifting that pattern. The other one is financially. So that financial, like I stress every once in a while, I'll have a moment of like, oh shit. There's chunks of bills that go out, and then you're like, ooh, there's not as much coming in this week or whatever. And I think that comes in hand with being like a private contractor or sole proprietor. It's a little bit, you feel like you're hustling all the time.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, but it's a vicious cycle, because then I'm like, okay, I just need stability, and then I'll have like monthly retainers, and then I'm like, I just need to be free, or I just want to work on like a pure passion project, start our podcast. And then, you know what I mean? Like it's such a delicate balance, I think, for the purpose, I guess, is the thing too.
Yeah. And if we think about like everything is energy,
or the illusion of free will.
Or the I don't think it's an illusion of free will. I think there is free will, but you see it as an illusion.
I don't know. I feel like confused on it, I guess. Because there have been periods in my life when I have felt like I have not had any free will. Like, like the biggest one that happened was like my mom got diagnosed with cancer. My sister has a developmental disability. Like I live in British Columbia. They live in Ontario. I had to basically like walk away from my life, or I didn't have to. It was my choice. But then in it, like my role had shifted so much, and to be there for my mom and my family. But then by doing that, then I couldn't be there for like the rest of my life, which exploded at that time. And there were times when I just thought, this is really fucking tough. But if I don't do this, I will regret it for the rest of my life, And then once I had my dog there with me, I think she was like a little grounding force, and just having like that daily like dog walk with her, like just brought like so much like grounding and things to it. But I was also raised to like not feel like never be a victim, never all those things, But I was like, this is really fucking hard. And I think I had just had so much anger inside of me, but I couldn't really let it out, or I just felt like everything was happening to me. And then, yeah, I guess right then it would have been good to have a nice little mantra.
Yeah. I mean, I think that so even shifting your perspective around this is happening to me, to see it as like, this is happening for me to step into a different role.
That one is a really hard one though, because I think my mother dying has never felt like it was happening for me.
Yeah, no, of course not.
Or like, you know what I mean? Like that's like a really hard thing to reckon. But to be there in that present moment, to like soak up all those last minutes of her like kind of physically being there. But that's kind of interesting too, because she had brain cancer. So it was like she was in the physical form there for quite a while, but then she would go off to like really like far out places and come back. Like it was really interesting and a bit of a trip at times too.
Yeah.
The whole thing was like, I felt like I was also a bit in like a science experiment.
I can't speak to that experience. I've never had someone pass that close to me in that way, or I've experienced a lot of death, but nothing like that. But I do believe that death is a natural part of our cycle and our experience, and especially those deep ties with our family, because those are such deep ingrained we chose our family as we come in here to who our parents are and who our siblings are. And, if your mom was still here, Adele would probably be with her, right? Is my assumption. And maybe it would have, the path would have, maybe you would have had her here for a little bit, but I feel like what a gift Adele is here in your life too, right? And so maybe your mom passing early was so that you and Adele could be reunited and build this beautiful relationship with one another. So this is like just shifting a bit of perspective. I could be totally off. I'm just saying that like there's
for sure
ways to view it.
In my mind, like Adele is my mom, and having Adele around and just the way she's been turned out, like her manners, her humor, like all of her one-liners, everything
are very much like your mom's.
100%.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah. My mom was really funny and kind of a boss, same as Adele.
Yeah. And you too. You're funny and a boss.
And so I'm constantly thankful like for what a good job my mom did. And,
like what a gift that is.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Yeah. But then like with the shifting of perspective, I'm constantly like, oh, my mom died when I was 32. It felt like so young, but some people's parents die at birth. Some people's parents die when they're 5 years old, 6 years old, 9 years old. You know what I mean? Like I had 32 years. I was able to know her, like through the raising and then like to become like a friend.
Do you feel there's any lingering resonance of her leaving you this early, or like, at this, like, is there leftover resonance of anger or frustration around her passing young in your life?
I don't know. Like, so it's been 10 years now. I still have some like physical trauma. Like I was mountain biking and this girl crashed in front of me and she knocked herself out cold, and I was right behind her. So I was the first one with her, and she was just like, she wasn't really, she wasn't breathing. And then she started like sputtering and kind of like spitting out of her mouth. And I instantly went into like that traumatic, because that was those last moments when like my mom passed. It was like that. And that brought like all that, like it was like super scary. And I don't know, death is really interesting. Like just all the different layers of trauma. Like there's like the loss of like that person, but then the actual like winding down of a human, of like every system in their body is such a crazy trip.
Scientifically, it's very fascinating. And then the emotional to the person of that energy of love and the title that they've held for so long, your mother going through that, like the fade almost, I guess. So one of my self-worth things that is, I look back, I'm like, oh, that's convenient. When I was 5, my stepdad was leaving. I didn't know that my mom and him had broken up, and he was jumping into a back of a truck on the Skeety, and he was driving off, and he was on his way to California to go do some, get his gyrocopter, I think they're called. They're basically helicopters without doors. They're like hollow,
very
those ones.
Badass.
Yeah, super
in the
badass.
Congo.
Totally. Yeah, kind of like army style looking. They hang out with machine guns, kind of like that. But I don't think that's what he was doing. But and so I was like trying to get his attention. I'm standing there. I can still see it. I'm standing there waving at him, trying to be like, bye, like say bye to me. I love you. Bye. And he looked at me and he turned. He jumped in the truck and he drove away. Just got a little emotional. And that was the last time I saw him. And but in that moment, what I took from that, that I was like not worthy, I wasn't good enough to say goodbye to, and he left. I wasn't seen. And how perfect is that that just was more confirmation of not being seen, not being loved, not being worthy, all the things, right? And then he passed away in the gyrocopter. There was a malfunction and he got knocked out because the gyrocopter like did this like jerky thing, and he crashed in the beaches of Mexico around in just before Christmas. It was weird because my sister knew he died before the phone rang and told us. That goes back to like my same karmic stuff, right?
Yeah.
Whoops, sorry, Om.
Yeah.
So that's why I was asking if there was still resonance around with your mom.
What I find really interesting too about this, like when you're 5 years old, is that you are dealing with like a really grown up real life thing through the lens of a 5-year-old eyes. Anything that happens to you as a child or you experience it and it's not explained to you properly.
Totally.
So then it's like stored in your body. And because it's not like processed or explained or anything, then that's like a form of abuse, but which I don't really like that kind of word. I like, to me, what resonates is saying like it's trauma that's stored in your body because it's like unprocessed emotions. And then it's like really confusing, which is like,
Exactly.
you felt like he was leaving you. Mm-hmm. He wasn't. Mm-hmm. Like your parents did break up, but he was like leaving to go do something else. Like, you know, and then, oh, that's really tragic. Have you done work to like shift that perspective or that narrative?
Oh,
like,
yeah. That's just like life work.
Yeah. But do you like go back to little Crystal?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I embraced
that
that little badass light and held her tight.
But then it's interesting for shifting perspective because you feeling such intense emotion at that age is probably like informed, you know, who you are like as a person, as a wife, as a friend, as a teacher, as a student. Like it's so interesting.
Oh yeah. It's like fascinating.
The idea of this one was like shifting perspective. And I guess it's just reminding people that they have choice in the moment or.
Yeah. Shifting perspective. I'd say choice in that moment, you have an option to react. And how do you want to react? So usually, you know, ideally you take a couple breaths and you get calm, because when you're in a heightened state of emotion, hence behind a car or, you know, in an interaction with a loved one or a friendship, if you get triggered, the trigger could stem from way back, right? From a conversation that you had a couple weeks ago with that person and it hasn't been communicated and resolved. So it could be something as tiny little thing that now there's like this outburst. Well, first it's breakdown of communication, but that's another conversation. However, in that moment, it's like, what is the best outcome? What do you want to see, and what steps do you take to see that is met, your highest self is presented, your highest integrity? Sometimes that's having a conversation after you've calmed down. Be like, you know what? I'm a little fiery right now. Let's have this conversation in a couple moments or even tomorrow. Or no, don't leave it till tomorrow. Don't go to sleep mad, right? That's that saying. And I would say like, yeah, calm yourself and choose that you might be reacting out of something other than what is presented. So that person is a little bit of a mirror, and it's all an opportunity of a teaching.
Life isn't happening to you, it's happening for you.
For the most part, and to be like, okay, maybe what's the lesson here? Maybe I could be a bit more compassionate. Maybe I could have patience here.
Deep breaths.
Deep breaths.
I like being really proactive with everything. So I think, okay, shifting perspective. If you're new to that, or if somebody who has had a very challenging like beginning in life, like what do you think are really good tools to sort of help you process and like move through some of like those old stored emotions?
Totally.
And because maybe you can't afford a therapist, or maybe you don't have like, I feel like my tools are like, I talk about it with like all my friends, or I have been fortunate enough to like do a lot of like therapy and like different, like all different types of modalities, you know, from like body work to like talk therapy to just like food, like, I don't know, like everything. There's so many different things, but what do you think is like the simplest tool?
And I'm speaking from a yogic perspective.
That's why you're here.
That's why.
No, that's why we're here.
That's why
all of us are here.
I'm coming from a yogic perspective, and there's many different perspectives. I'll say that. So when clearing, what we're talking about is karmas or patterns of, you know, these experiences we've had since different traumas from childhood and things like that, that we're creating in our life. The first step is noticing the patterns. So, and how you notice the patterns, it's if they're unhealthy, if they have a negative outcome, or you leave feeling shitty or feeling like you have to apologize.
And do you think it just becomes familiar and that's when you start to notice the
Yeah,
pattern?
and some people don't recognize the pattern. When you're in it, it's harder. You have to have this some sort of awareness that something's off, and the wanting to change or the wanting to heal. Like you can't. It's like a drug addict. You can't help them unless they want to help themselves. It's the same idea. You have to want to be able to evolve yourself and better yourself and really work on yourself. You have to get to that point, wherever stage that is for you. If you hit rock bottom, or some of us like to stay in the bottom, but and I've been there. I get it. So
comfy.
It's yeah, because
it's familiar.
It's familiar because it's what you experience, is what you know as love, right? Mm-hmm. In many ways of whatever love is for you.
Oh, that's interesting. That's a whole other topic.
It is. There's lots of topics. Okay, so recognizing the pattern that doesn't serve you anymore, right? So I have this thing. I'll give you an example. I don't like it when people go off track of the way it's supposed to be. So there's like rules of life, right? There's rules of the road. There's rules of integrity to your word. If you say something, you go against that, I'm the first one to be like, well, wait a second. You're not integral to the word that you said, you vocalized. So I'm like that. I like it to be a certain way because of that. And when you break the rules, when it's out of integrity, that can bother me. Now, why does it have to be so by the book, right? Going rogue is a big one. I love to go rogue as well. So it's a funny kind of catch-22. So it is. It's like, well, wait a minute. Why did you break the rules? You said this, and now people are being affected by that because you changed it.
Mm-hmm. This seems like a childhood thing that we can unpack later.
Probably.
Too.
Oh my God. Isn't it all? But that is a childhood thing, right? So that's an issue. And so when it was like, but you said that was my class, let's just say, yeah. And then you gave it to somebody else, but you gave my word. Well, what? Like, then there's irritation. Well, that's a pattern. That's being like, why can't you just let it go? Hari Om, and just go at the rhythm. Like there's this rigidness. So when there's rigidness or something that blocks you or irritates you and you don't feel good about it and you keep seeing that come up, then it's like, oh, there's a pattern. So that's more like, okay, this is a pattern. I'm going to choose to shift this pattern, recognize, but there's still an emotion component. You still feel the anger. You still feel the frustration. You still feel the sadness. Then you're choosing to shift it. Okay, I feel you. I experienced that. Thank you. I'm going to choose this new way. I'm going to let that go and perhaps not be reactive. I'm like, you know what? It's all good. And the more you practice that, because it's a practice, that starts to shift. That old pattern stops showing up. And then you're on to the next pattern that you get to shift.
It's interesting though too, because when you say that, like, I don't mean to like break apart your example, but
no, do it.
But in your example, I'm like, okay, well, you are internalizing your class getting taken away from you based on your history. And then you feel the irritation, which is from your history, and then what do you do with it at that point? Because I often internalize it, keep it internal, like fire erupting, instead of saying, oh, like, why did you change that? Like, you had said that was my class and now you're taking it away from me. I feel like this. And then maybe they're like, oh, well, I just thought you couldn't do it because you're doing this other class and it like logistically it didn't make sense to me. Mm-hmm. Like it's so funny. Like, are you good at in the moment asking in a non-combative way? Like, why? Or do you feel like you internalize it and make up your own story and your own narrative, your own spin based on all of your historical experiences or...
Both.
Yeah. It's funny.
It is.
I find it fascinating.
Very fascinating. When you're in it, when it's your own stuff, it's harder to see it and process it. And that's what really is important to have, like, as you said, like have the tools to either talk with it with somebody, like you've got a good girlfriend or good guy friend, and like vocalize it. And sometimes just talking about it can help you hear it back.
But it's also in the moment.
It can be, like, but you can also step back and be like, okay, process. Okay, now I'm going to communicate with a more clear mind of not that old way of my story, bringing it to the table, right?
I had a funny experience when I was talking to my therapist about this guy that I had just started dating, and I can't even remember what happened. And I was telling him all about it, and I couldn't believe it. And then he said, "Oh, did you tell him, or did you ask him about that?" And I said, "Of course not. I asked all of my girlfriends. I talked about it with like everybody except him." You know? And then I thought, "Oh, wow, there's some interesting perspective."
Yeah.
Yeah. I had like, or like those conversations you have like after the fact, like I should have said this, and this, but I didn't. I was like, I was triggered back into that primary state where I was just super quiet. Like I was like that little girl still beside the door of my bedroom listening, with my ear against the door, listening to my parents fight. Like I go into like when they say like fight, flight, or
fight or flight,
freeze. I think it's like freeze, flight, or fight, maybe.
Oh, okay.
I've got, I'm a bit of like a freeze flyer, I think. Yeah. I don't know. It's got to be like against someone else or me standing up for someone else where I'll like go into fight mode. Otherwise, I'm just like, peace, I'm out.
Well, mic drop, I'm gone.
You're a flyer?
I'm usually a fighter, but I find that has gotten me into a lot of trouble. Like standing up for the little guy. Pattern. There's a pattern there.
Joan of Arc on the hunt.
See my light, motherfuckers.
Yeah.
Hear me roar.
Oh man.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, okay. How my little sister has Down syndrome, and so she like I've been her protector and like her interpreter and everything like my whole life. And I did like some deep work once, and it was like a series of like breath work, like Gestalt, like anyways, it was like all these things in one. I got into this very like angered state. All the anger that came out, obviously like directed to my dad, but it was all about my sister. Like it was just like I didn't even really have anger. Like for me, I was like, what? I don't even care about me. Like you do whatever you want, but like when you mess with her, it doesn't make sense.
Primal.
Yeah. Because that is just like hard stop, black, white. Like who messes
Protective. I know.
with Adele?
And a lot of, right? But it's funny because a lot of people are that way around their own ego. An ego meaning who they are, like threatening who you are in the world, right? And that comes up all the time of like, speaking bad about you. Of course, then
do you do that a lot?
React.
Speak poorly of me?
I don't think I've said one bad thing about you our entire
Likewise,
relationship.
That's nice.
Nicole, my girlfriend, and I talk with it. We're like, when you explain somebody, you're like, oh, they're really nice. Like, they're like the nicest person I've ever met. And Nicole and I, one day we were talking about someone, when someone comes into your circle and then they leave, like actually physically, and then they leave and you say something about them, like, oh, they're the best or whatever.
Yeah.
We're like, oh my God, she's so nice. And her and I looked at each other, we started laughing and we're like, neither of us are ever going to be explained like that, oh my God, she's so nice. That's not who we are.
Oh man.
We're like the fire ones.
In my early 20s, I had this friend, Justin, and I think he'd maybe had a couple cocktails, and he just looked at me and he said, I love you, Andrea. And I said, of course you do. Like, why wouldn't you? And he goes, I know a lot of people that don't love you.
Oh, that was a very Adele response.
And because I've grown up my whole life with Adele, I laughed. It was like, yeah, hilarious. Like I couldn't believe it. Like it's still like 20 something years later. I'm like, that is so fucking funny.
That is funny. No,
Yeah.
Honestly, anyone that meets me now, like they knew me from the Amsterdam days, like the bar in Whistler I used to work at, and firecracker. Oh man, I was a bitch. And then I come back now and people are like, oh, I know you from Whistler and the Amsterdam. I'm like, the first thing I do is apologize. I'm like, oh, I'm so sorry. I was an asshole to you.
Yeah. So funny.
Pure ego and early 20s and
it is
alcohol.
It's funny though, our narrative, because you're still holding on to that as like, and those are probably like protection, like enchantments you have like all around you and like armor and everything.
Ooh, enchantments. I like that.
Yeah. I don't know where that came from. And, but I actually think I would always say that you're nice. You know what I mean? Yeah.
Really, Andrea? You don't.
It's not maybe my first word. My first word is passionate. Right?
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
Nice isn't the first word that comes to mind when you think about me.
Yeah, most people actually don't really say that about me either. But that's more from like, or my thought of that is more from me as a child, because I'm a middle child. I was super challenging, and my mom was pretty strict, and probably, I don't know, being raised in the 80s, like said a lot of things to try to like make me not a nightmare. But then it created a lot of different stories like within it. Yeah, it's interesting. She was visiting me once in, well, she did more than once, but one time she was in Whistler. And so I'm like in my early 20s. And she was talking to a friend of mine. And I don't even remember if I don't even think she'd had a couple drinks, but she was just going off about what an awful teenager I was.
Oh, that's fun.
And I didn't really take it in. Like, I just thought, oh, that's really interesting. And now telling you this story all this time later, I'm like, oh, that's like for her, like unprocessed. Like that was major. I moved out, like basically, I started college when I was 17. Like that was like stuff that we weren't really able to sort of fully heal or process or like move through, because I left the house and then I went on to sort of like become my more like independent self, but then she didn't really get to. When I was 21, I wrote her a letter and I said, "Dear Mom, really sorry for 15 to present day."
I did the same thing.
Did
Actually,
you?
well, I called them and I apologized.
Yeah.
But I have two moms. My other mom, my number two mom, she was saying something similar. My last visit before that, and like something like a little triggering in the way like, oh, you were so difficult, and like went and gave some examples. And in my mind, I was like, well, I'm sure you had a part of that. Like it was kind of like, well, there's two people here in the relationship, and I'm pretty sure that wasn't all on me. Like I'm pretty sure I was most likely reacting to the assholeness that you were, as well as I'll take responsibility on my end, but don't think that it's just all me, because that's not true.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's interesting. It's good though. Well, have you had that conversation with her as an adult?
No, I chose to just not react and let it go.
Mm-hmm.
Like I heard it and I was like, that doesn't seem right. And then I was like, whatever.
But that's also
it didn't affect me.
But that's also compassion for yourself.
Yeah.
So that you don't like, also you're a teenager. Like you're not a fully formed person. Like, you know what I mean? Like you can't be tried in a court of law as an adult because you're not one.
Thank goodness for that.
So you don't have to carry that. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there's some things that you can choose to react to and some things you just don't you just don't need to. I was like, I don't need to open up this can of worms. I've healed myself from it. That's the big part about clearing the karmas is I would say that as you work on yourself, you can't wait for someone else to apologize and say sorry to you. You have to find your own sense of peace within an experience of healing. Because if you're going to wait around for someone else to apologize for you to find that healing and that like sense of peace within yourself because of it, you can wait around for lifetimes.
100%. Because I think for me, like the whole topic of this thing is shifting perspective. And I think for me, when I was really able to do that in my life was when I was able to have compassion with myself for who I may have been then, but I'm not that now. And I can see all the things that led up for me to have acted that way. Doesn't mean now that I see that, I can't unsee it. Like if I could go back, it would be different. But all I can do is change today forward.
Absolutely.
Like carrying that.
Compassion's a big one. Yeah. 100%.
To close off, shifting perspective, free will, compassion, what is a mudra or like a really quick get you into your body when you can kind of feel like the world's closing in on you, or when you feel like you don't have a choice, or you feel like, there's like you're carrying a really heavy load.
The first breath mudra that comes to mind is actually Simha mudra, which is the lion's breath, because how I feel it in my body is this a little bit of like it's either anger or frustration, and that type of energy needs to be moved. So we want to release it so that we can, again, be in that calm place to be able to move forward as the best version of ourselves, the best choices to move forward. So if we're in that kind of rigidy, stuck, old pattern way of being, we need to shift the energy to be able to take a couple steps forward in the right direction towards the spirit. So Simha Mudra is sticking out your tongue, opening your jaw as wide as possible, and turning your gaze up into the third eye. And you let almost like a ha sound. So it doesn't have to be loud, like strong on the vocal cords. It can be more of like you're fogging up a mirror in front of you, like that ha, that is a little stronger, right? Yeah, like a ha. And by opening your jaw really wide and sticking out your tongue as long as possible, the jaw has this connection to the hips. The hips have the connection to your root of your, like Muladhara, we call it, which is the first foundation of who you were in this world. So young age, about 1 to 7 years old, of how you feel that you're learning how to be in the world. And this is where a lot of that old belief and trauma and stuff can be learnt and held. So by releasing this, we're helping to shift the old into the new.
Let's do it.
Okay, inhale fully.
How many is there? Is there a magic number for how many you should do at a time?
As many as you feel. Like start with 3. 3 I find is like the
A magic
number.
But it's also the number of drama.
I've never heard that. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, in yoga, the yoga perspective, 3 is like the beginning, middle, and end of the cycle.
Ooh.
It's Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva. So it's the creation, sustainability, and completion or death. So the 3 is kind of where we take it from.
All right. 3 lion's breath starting now. Rush.
Yeah, you feel that?
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel a little lightheaded.
Yeah.
I like it.
This is the Daily Practice Podcast with
Crystal Borrelli
and Andrea Helleman. And what do you think? Just tools to help you move in the world?
Tools to help you move in the world. Hari Om. Yeah, life teachings, life practices. Good luck. Om Hari Om. Hari Om. Hari Om.
This is the Daily Practice Podcast with Crystal Borrelli
and Andrea Helleman. If you want to check us out on the World Wide Web, our website is thedailypractice.life, and on there we have all kinds of resources, but we have a free full moon course. It's about an hour long. There's a yoga practice, pranayama, you'll learn a mantra as well as story time, and all taught by Crystal Borrelli.
Hari Om.